Hello, Environmental Policy 1 students. Back to you for week 2 subject matter. This week is about measuring social well-being in the environment. It deals with how we as a society use aggregate measures to assess how well we're doing on the environment. As you know, in today's society, gross domestic product, or GDP, is the main measure that governments use to determine how well the economy is doing within any given country. The GDP measures personal consumption expenditures, net exports, net capital formation, that is investments in new businesses, things like that. But one of the things it doesn't do a particularly good job of is measuring how well we're doing on the environment. You'll notice that we actually don't have very many good national level measures. In fact, we have no readily available national index to measure how well we're doing on the environment. And of course, environmental economists, including myself, will argue that what does not get measured doesn't get counted, and that includes the environment. And we can have economic growth that is astronomical, the way China has, for example, for a number of years, 12% economic growth, which looks great on paper. But the question then becomes, but what has happened to the environment? What has happened to natural capital to sustain that or to create the conditions for that growth? And are we robbing natural capital in order to get GDP growth? And if so, which we most certainly are, what are the implications of that for future well-being of citizens, the future well-being of countries? And at present, we actually don't have any good measures to talk about that in the same way we, for example, talk about GDP, and everybody readily recognizes what that measures. So GDP growth is 2% or 1%. Ooh, that's not too good. Or GDP has shrunk by 0.05% last quarter. Ooh, that's not good at all. GDP is up to 4%. Well, in developed economies, that's really good. That's doing really well. But what is that really telling us about the environment and social well-being? Probably not much more than the fact that maybe some people, and even then we don't know who, has more money in their pocket, or more products have been sold, or their company's doing better. But then their company might be doing better economically, but damaging the environment vociferously. We don't know from the existing measures that we have. So this week is about that problem of what we don't measure won't be counted, and what we don't count won't be recognized in public policy to the degree that it needs to be recognized. So when this topic is particularly important, because if we're going to shape society into new ways of thinking about the environment, clearly we need to shape the information tools that people have available to them to inform their decision making. So there's been a number of schools of thought that have emerged that have tried to create new measures that correct for the weaknesses of the GDP with respect to the environment, and not only environment but social well-being as well. Of which environment is a key part, but it's not the only part, obviously. We want to measure, these societal factors. We want to measure environmental factors, so we have a measure that better reflects sustainable development rather than just economic development. You'll recall the terms from last week on sustainable development as opposed to just economic development in the GDP. For the deep ecologists, or the ecological economists, they would argue that a successful environmental economy is one that actually has a steady state economy and just does a better job distributing its wealth amongst the citizenry. So there's different ways of looking at this problem of the fact that we don't do a very good job measuring the environment in our aggregate economic statistics. The information that the public sees with respect to how well we're doing on the economy is not reflecting how well we're doing on the environment or social well-being. So there have been a number of other indexes that have been developed, and you're going to see those in your readings. The Index of Sustainable Economic Welfare, the Genuine Progress Indicator, Green GDPs, Genuine Wealth Indicators, Gross National Happiness, which came out of Bhutan. Sounds funny, but it's very interesting what they've done with that. because they look at things from a much different perspective, that economic growth is supposed to service social and environmental well-being and not the other way around, which is another way of thinking about this problem of the GDP, where the economy basically makes everything else subservient to its growth. Whereas in some of these other measures, what they're trying to say is that economic well-being depends very much on social and environmental well-being, and so we should be taking care of these things as well as we take care of economic prosperity. So in this week, I want you to get a sense as to how big this debate really is. I mean, how big ecological economics and environmental economics really is in terms of transforming the way we think, the way our institutions of government report out on how well we're doing, to how we make decisions on economic growth. If some of these other indexes, if we're going to advance a major economic proposal, it would have to be, for GDP, it would be, oh, good, economic proposal, as long as it doesn't do unnecessary radical damage to the environment or culture, then it should go ahead because economic growth dominates. But in some of these other measures, they're saying, well, we need to reverse that burden of proof. Well, is it advancing social and environmental health and well-being? Yes or no? And if it doesn't, then we should look at this economic proposal differently, or we should look at other economic proposals that are more friendly to these other factors that contribute to sustainable development. So that constant large global debate is often ongoing. So the environment is not just a technicist exercise, it's a cultural transformative exercise that deals with all of our governance institutions and the way people look at things. But they can't look at them differently if they don't have the sources of information that are required for them to look at them differently. And so that's what this week is about, but in terms of the macroeconomic indicators that our society uses to judge whether we're doing well or not well. Okay, so take a look at those, think them through carefully, and understand the scale of the challenge that some of these questions create for us all. Okay?